Good afternoon, folks. This is Sri Bharadwaj, Chief Operations Information Officer for Longevity Health. Longevity Health is uh, you know, a very innovative provider of services, both on the payer side as well as on the provider side. We are very unique in the model that we take care of patients beyond the age of 80, 85. So think about grandmas, grandpas who in some respects cannot perform their active daily living activities. And it's a big deal to take care of those, take care of them. We have several clinical professionals who go and see them in their nursing homes and take care of them to make sure that they get the best care possible, while at the same time they're able to spend some of their short time that they are around still with their kith and kin, right? I mean, their brothers, sisters, grandsons, granddaughters. So we perform a very, very crucial function for that population. And that population, by the way, is growing tremendously, extremely fast. We've seen a growth of about 30% in the past year with our ability to see the number of patients across the board. So, thank you to HIMSS Northern California chapter for the opportunity here. And we'll talk through some interesting topics around the security of the future. And one of the key things that we'll talk about, there's a theme out here that we will walk through. What are some of the issues that we see today? What are some of the issues that we will see probably tomorrow? And how security has to evolve or is evolving with those innovative capabilities. Just take, if you're from a frame of mind perspective, if you look at what we've been through in the past, probably even 5, 8, 10 years, we have seen an advent of several of these Internet of Things kind of devices, right? I mean, the Internet of Things devices assume that the internet is ubiquitous. Number one, it is working 100% all the time, every time. And there is no need for somebody to use a browser to actually log in and review something that's available on the World Wide Web, right? You're just going to go, assume it's there, assume it's going to use those protocols, send the communication to clinicians, receive communications back from clinicians, helping the members, helping the patients, helping anybody who needs care, activities that they will be able to perform on their own and improve patient lives. I mean, take a hospital at home, for example, where we've seen hospitals not admitting patients from the ED to a bed in the hospital, but actually shipping the patients with a set of devices home so they can be taken care of them in their homes through either virtual means or through once a day check-in, which happens to be a physical check-in by a nurse or an RN or somebody who can swing by the house and at least see them. So that is where we are today when we look at what is happening in the ability of our hospitals to take care of patients. This assumes a bunch of things. This assumes that the data that's coming from the devices is secure. The data is coming from the devices that it is coming from. The data that is coming to us is in a way that we can, what I would call, the technical term word is provenance. So there is provenance of the data coming to the clinician and the ability for the clinician to respond back to that, to whatever he or she is receiving, and making sure the level of care that he gets will be almost similar to the care that he would get in a hospital system. And the one thing we've seen is, hospital-acquired conditions or diseases, sure you call it, like CLABSI, CARI, those kinds of things, tend to have a lower ability to get in that situation because they are in their familiar environment, number one. Number two, their socioeconomic environment allows them to have somebody in their home helping them with what they need. And in addition to that, they are not what you would call highly acute, right? So you are able to treat patients in place of care, in place, what we would call treat in place technology or treat in place capability that clinicians are now becoming used to. Think about it and move it further, one step further, and talk about what opportunities we have in that area where we are now looking at preventive care, care that's being delivered where you You can get access to the data, you can get access to the information that you need as you're walking around the house, as you're walking out the door to your car. The car talks to your house, it automatically manages the temperature in inside the car, helps you get to place of work through autopilot or any other means, because all of this thing is done basically with the knowledge that the internet is around you. It's there. It's seemingly there like a utility that happens and you don't need to know about, right? That's the kind of situation. This also allows a lot of capabilities where the hackers can get in, try to understand what needs to happen, or tinkering and can create havoc in the environment of members, patients, and our people's lives. So how do we protect those? How do we prevent those? How do we protect what is it that we need to see, and from a data provenance perspective, and how we provide that feedback? That's a very important question. And there are technologies, tools today that do that today, but it is based on today's technology, not what's happening in the future. So this is important that as we evolve, we got to evolve with that capability. Many of us are aware of the fact that we've got a lot of people who go through sleep technology today that has the ability to evaluate what's happening while you're sleeping, what's happening while you're moving, what's happening while a patient is going through some sort of trauma, right? So at the same time, as we are looking at doing that from an innovative perspective, we also have to look at, okay, what can happen if somebody hacks into that process, somebody hacks into the human brain, start evaluating what needs to happen. Can we take that and do something about it? What protocols can you put in place to make sure that we can manage that? And so some other, what I would call malicious person, is not able to get into that information. So the other thing, of course, we always are well aware of. I mean, we've used robots in healthcare for years. Take the Da Vinci, for example, has been in use for a long, long time. And as we look at more and more robots coming into play, we got technologies and AI that play a big role in understanding what robots can do or cannot do, but at the same time, allowing them to self-learn based on what you taught them once or taught them again. The ability for them to recall that information and perform the same actions in a way that makes sense would be phenomenal. It's great, phenomenal value. But at the same time, they also will be able to perform the same malicious actions if that is what they are taught as well. So think about those things that could occur as part of that process, because it's not easy to just do this. It's going to be a combination of things we need to get done. Organ donation. I mean, we are so far ahead from a healthcare innovation perspective, where we've got 3D devices that are being able to be printed, be able to be effectively used, and can be what I would call substituted for what we would expect to be a human element. Is that something we can trust? I mean, what happens if somebody gets hold of it? What happens if somebody is able to intervene with the data that's flowing from that 3D device, if it is being managed externally, right? So that's the other piece that we got to think through and go from there in terms of the security aspect of it. This is very unique. I mean, we've been wearing wearable technologies now for the better part of 20 years in some aspects or the other. I mean, you take a phone, a watch, several things that we use today. As we evolve with the technology, we've evolved with the ability for us to use these technologies as well, and now rely more and more on smart devices to do our jobs, right? I mean, take an example. 20 years ago, when I was doing exercise, I never had a watch that would tell me what calories did I burn, or how long had I exercised for, and so on and so forth. And if I had to go get one of those devices at that time, it was like almost difficult to do, or would be at an exorbitant price. You get that today for a few $100s, and you can use those fairly effectively and get much better at it. So, but at the same time, you're exposing your data to somebody else, which could be a situation where you may not want to. Now you talk about, who owns the data. Does Apple own the data, or do you own the data that's in your Apple Watch? You get those kinds of conversations, those kind of situations as well. So think about what those things are and how those things will evolve as we move forward. The one of the things I just want to take you through some history so you can understand what is it that we are talking about here, right? Um, 1950s, we started quite some time ago. I didn't realize it was 1950s, but it is the cardiac pacemaker originally was there in 1950s, and now we've got coming down to today's world where you went through MRIs, laser surgery, doing ultrasounds for how many ultrasounds have people done on pregnant moms that have saved lives. That's great. That's fabulous. That's fantastic. And now the ultrasound devices are just being pulled around through physicians' cars in the back, and they just go home and they can do an ultrasound at any point in time, almost, right? So that's where we evolved to, and they should be able to use the same ultrasound machine with a Bluetooth, submit the data into their EMR, and automatically send it to somebody else in some other part of the world, even to take a look at, to get a second opinion, and also probably document that to get paid for. All of that stuff is happening today. All of that stuff is working in a way that makes sense, but at the same time, it comes with a lot of baggage that we are taking into consideration as people who allow these technologies to build around us. I mean, if you take the application of AI, right? I mean, there's a virtual physical application. What are those things that we typically see AI in medicine? I mean, when there is a highly repetitive work, right? So reviewing um, tons of images again and again and again to truly understand how a difference in image will be able to be detected by a machine, right? That's where you are able to use an AI type environment. We also allow doctors who can get that information faster, right? Today, if people used to wait for 3 to 5 to 6 to 8 days before a radiologist could actually see an image and find, if there is a doubt, you go back and do the same thing a million times to really truly believe this is right or wrong. But what is happening now is we're able to take this information, making it work, delivering it much faster, more accurate, obviously, because you're teaching that application to do exactly what you would like to do. Does it replace personnel and staffing in medical facilities? Probably in the administrative areas, definitely, but it also puts the effort on the person who's using the device to be far more sophisticated to understand how that makes sense. Wait times and automated scheduling. I mean, this is nothing unusual, right? We've looked at it for. I mean, take a TSA wait times. You'll be able to see what which airport has got how much wait times and what is happening with the TSA. Same thing happens with a physician. Same thing happens in the clinical office. Same thing happens with scheduling of surgeries through a block scheduling capability that we've become so used to. All of these are performed through multiple levels of artificial intelligence that we built with technologies that provide sophisticated support to making decisions. However, when you look at it, right, the deep learning devices is not going to replace clinicians. They are not going to be in a way that makes sense to just switch off and move forward, but they are going to be in a position where they will be able to assist in making better decisions. That is the way we see it working. So we talked about AI. We talked about the benefits of AI. There's opportunities where AI can assist physicians. So think about our reliability on AI, right? As we mature with these technologies, as we mature with the ability for these technologies to use the internet, to use other forms of decision-making techniques, like a phenomenal data lake that provides, data in almost instantaneously to a physician. That information can be utilized and effectively managed if you can repeatedly train the application to look at this information. For example, on the right-hand side, you would see, the cancer classification, right? Whether it is benign or malignant. This was all done through a level of artificial intelligence that was built into the application, because the application has seen again and again and again, a million times over, and it has learned from those capabilities what it can do or cannot do. Here are other additional, kind of AI type use cases that we've seen in healthcare, right? I mean, it allows you to definitely look at early diagnosis because you are able to feed that information to machines and get the feedback. You are, of course, also able to get the disease treatment as well. I mean, what has worked, what has not worked? How do you make sure it works the way it's supposed to work? And how do you pull data from several people for whom it has worked? And how do you be able to get that information to that specific set of population with those specific set of criteria that can be deployed for improved patient care at that time? There is definitely a reduction in errors because there could have been a mistake by a radiologist because he was not just feeling well that day. Well, those kinds of things are now becoming a history of the past, right? Because you're able to put through these things through a common kind of set of framework that have been built out. That framework defines what is an issue, what is not, and then what is it that we need to do and how to make it work, right? The other piece that I've seen also is, risk alerts, right? It allows us to kind of almost, in some respects, I shouldn't say this always, but in some respects, to a certain extent, automate, quote unquote, the decision-making process, and it helps the physician with providing some level of comfort that the decision he or she makes is appropriate with the data given to him, but also is appropriate in the sense that it is based on, as many physicians will agree, it's based on real world evidence that we can feed that into the AI environments. When you look at the ability for it to self-correct, which is a big deal, just because it's accepted that it was done once and once done accurately, doesn't mean it is accurate all the time, every time. So from a control security perspective, how do we pull that information together as well? Now you're talking about, the why do people go down this path? Why would people want to do this in the first place, right? I mean, we've heard this a million times about OECD countries. The amount of dollars they spend on healthcare is not related to the improved care that their constituents receive. There is always this larger geriatric population that is coming into play that needs a lot more information, a lot more attention. And we definitely have the vacancies of this is almost pre-COVID, by the way. So it's 2020 and 1.2 million. Now it's probably like 2 million to 2.5 million vacancies we have across the globe. And this is where I think if for us to get more reliable on using a technology that makes sense, would be beneficial for us from a security perspective. What are the challenges? This is an important thing that I want to talk about today. What are the challenges with these kinds of things, right? Number one, because it is expensive to develop, there's a higher development cost. Obviously, there is an ROI, but the ROI is far-reaching, it's not like immediate. And so the development costs are higher. That means what happens is people sometimes, obviously, when it is expensive, take shortcuts to get stuff done. So when you take shortcuts to get stuff done, it happens, there are two things that happen, like, oh my God, I can't keep testing this again and again. The 3 times we tested it, it's fine, let's move forward. That's one thing that happens. Complacency sets in terms of, okay, how do I deliver? Then, of course, the area where people just say, oh, it's okay, it's fine, nobody's going to use it anyways outside our environment, it's perfectly fine. We don't need to talk to the security folks and kind of put it together. It should be fine. We should be able to use it. And they've already approved the beta version, so it should be fine. That is also something that we have seen and I've heard from several folks in the industry. Then, of course, there is integration issues, right? Ethical issues, whether is this the right thing to do? Is this something that we want to allow medical practitioners to adopt AI? How effective is that going to be? And of course, people are always worried about what happened to my job, right? I don't know what is it that we need to do and how we go about doing that. Then you talk about data privacy and security, which is a big deal because we are beginning to realize that the industry still needs a lot more maturity around that area and figure out how to make it work. Then talk about data exchange. Who owns the data? Like we talked about before. I mean, is this data something that I want to manage, or should I give it to somebody else for them to do this? Should I take all the parties in the healthcare system, the physicians and the pharmaceutical companies get access to my data? Is that okay? Of course, you got HIPAA and the regulations, but the day HIPAA was written, which was years and years ago, is not evolved as much with what's happening with the industry, with what's happening with technology. So we probably have to rewrite some of these technologies, these regulations to meet what is happening with these innovative technologies. That's the other part that we need to understand. Then, of course, looking at software update. How often do you update it? Microsoft releases version 5.0, 13.0, 25.0. How are you going to keep up to date? What is it that you need to do that? Then, of course, the areas where I've seen more issues is, quantities of data, right? I mean, is the data clean? Is the data protected? Is the data appropriate? Does it give the patients the right level of privacy protection? That's another area where we need to look at. Then talk about, clean databases, right? Can I trust the data? Is the data, how much transparency can I allow with AI? What happens if I use AI, make a decision, and that decision happens to be incorrect? Can I blame the computer for it, right? So those are some of the other questions that we need to go through and figure out how to make that work. Then, of course, right, I mean, as you've seen in several areas, we saw that with COVID testing as well, right? Inclusion. Are we including the right population? To the right demographics of population? Are we taking into consideration those things while we look at AI output? Is that appropriate for this particular? So if I take a male African American who's been age 48, who's had a series of socioeconomic issues, can he or she be the same with another with another male who's a Caucasian, similar age, but who came from a rather affluent kind of environment, right? So the same AI capabilities don't apply purely because of where each of these originated, what data was gathered over a period of time, and how much information you have about that person in order to make that decision. So that's the other part that we need to make sure we got it. Then, of course, right, interoperability and healthcare IT infrastructure is always there. I mean, people will complain that the rural hospitals have a lot less to spend on healthcare IT, whereas the people who spend it in the larger organizations have the ability to do it. But how is that effective? How is it something that we are using? I mean, is it secure that is being put in place in terms of infrastructure? That's the other question that we need to get to. Then I want to talk about the clinical trials, right? We've been able to utilize the COVID aspects, the COVID capabilities, and looking at it, what are some of the challenges that we've seen, how they've been able to pull it together, how they've been able to manage what we've been able to achieve in a very short span of time in terms of the clinical trials that occurred over several continents at the same time. Several vaccines were produced. Several vaccines went through a process of verification, validation that typically goes through. And what we've seen. I'm going to stop here and ask if there are any questions on the call. Moderate.
Yes, Sri. How can AI help with reducing costs of healthcare?
Today, we have seen a utilization of AI in specific areas, and let's talk about the areas where we have seen it used well. For example, we had a situation where there was a hairline fracture of the rib of a patient, and as the as the hairline fracture was being reviewed by the radiologist, there was our AI based technology told us that there was a hairline fracture, but it was fairly invisible to the naked eye. What the radiologist was able to confirm was that yes, it was invisible to the naked eye purely because he just couldn't see it. But what the computer told him was to look for certain aspects in certain areas that would help him identify exactly where that hairline fracture was, which helped the patient tremendously, especially the patient was an aging patient with severe bronchitis and COPD. Would have been disastrous for the patient to have gone through some sort of a capability, assuming there was no fracture. So we would have prolonged the length of stay of that member in the hospital. We would have, provided him medications that would have been very different from that capability. We would have just assumed it was a normal anomaly of a COPD or something happening within the lungs. Would have completely not seen that in some respects. So that way, AI offers the benefits from a what I would call from a care perspective, number one. Number two, that information was very useful to the radiologist because the radiologist only had to confirm. If the radiologist had to go and do this time and time and again for about 100 times just to make sure, that would have taken him 3-4 hours of time, which would have been a kind of what you would term to be in technical terms waste in healthcare, right? Somebody's doing the same thing again and again and again, trying to evaluate something be considered waste in healthcare. So that's where there is a reduction in costs coming into the healthcare environment.
In terms of personal health data, with, smartwatches releasing, sharing data to third parties, what is best practices from a patient's perspective to ensure that they know what type of data is being shared with third parties? Or for instance, with now high-tech companies also participating in ownership of healthcare clinics, how do they know what type of data is being shared?
In many respects, HIPAA allows you to share data for treatment, payment, operations, so TPO. So if the data is required for treatment of your treatment, not everybody's, your treatment, then it is okay for people to share the data. So for example, if I share my data that's from my Apple Watch to my clinician, and I know for sure it's only the clinician who's going to review it, not everybody up and down the stream, makes perfect sense. That's for treatment. Payment, right? When I take the same watch and say I'm going to pay my medical bill through that, that also is acceptable from a payment perspective. And for operations, for them to create a claim, to run administrative process around it, if they use your clinical data, where a payer has to review your medical data or for what you would call clinical review, that makes perfect sense. What happens is people start using clinical data for non-TPO purposes, for them to go do some analysis, for them to try to figure out what do I do with this patient? What do I sell to this patient? What are the different diagnoses the patient has got? So I can put him on a plan that he would have otherwise not gone into outside of their clinical care. That is where we have a problem. That is where we have a situation where patients now need to control who has access to their data. It's patient's data. So as long as the patient realizes that it is his data, that he needs to make sure that the person who is sharing with is going to be using that for the purpose of his care, not a problem. Where we are seeing misuse is where people use this data ineffectively or allow this data to be used or shared without the consent of the patient. So as long as the patient provides consent, okay, I want you are doing, let us say, research on my COPD and the contraindication associated with a particular drug. Not a problem. You provide the consent, they tell you what it is, you move forward. That is where the difference lies between what you use, how you use the data, and what you need to do as a patient to help people understand that this is my data. They need to tell you and go from there. Lastly, if you look at watches and other devices that are, pulling your data, you read through the fine print. Yes, it's always not always easy, but read through the fine print. It'll tell you how the data is being shared. The Apple app will tell you how the data is being shared. As long as you look at that and you accept the fact that it is going to be used for non-clinical purposes, meaning outside of your care, and you agree to that, then it's not an issue. So that's the other thing that I will ask people to caution around.
Thank you, Sri, for such an insightful session.